Hey guys, so today I wanted to kind of talk about. It's been a while since I made any video content, but I wanted to talk about professional artistic software. What is a professional piece of software? What makes it professional? What makes a software popular? That kind of stuff, right? So first and foremost, the reason I make this video is because I spent the past year using Procreate, almost completely and utterly, kind of like exclusively using Procreate, because I wasn't gonna let the investment that I spent on the iPad Pro kind of go by the wayside. And there's been times where I've really not wanted to use Procreate. There's been times where the iPad as a artistic medium, or the iPad Pro as a Cintiq or a graphics tablet replacement, hasn't always been completely and utterly satisfactory. But I stuck with it because I wanted to find not the limits, but I wanted to find the baseline of what this tool could be, because I've seen people create incredible work in Procreate, and I've created some work in Procreate that is pretty close to the style of work or the standard of work I can create on Photoshop. Is it a professional tool though? The simplest answer to that is yes, because there are professional artists that make a living only using Procreate. But there are different standards of professional tools. As far as the iPad goes, it's pretty much the kind of apex predator of iPad art software, iPad art tools. You might argue that Clip Studio Paint is better, and it probably is, to be honest, because it's actual full Clip Studio Paint, and the brushes in Clip Studio Paint are flawless. And if you know people that use Clip Studio Paint, their process is very, very, very streamlined and strong, because that software is very strong, and software does help, right? But Procreate has this fire in its belly, right? It's this software that, for the most part, came out of nowhere. People were using it for years. People like Nikolai Locke Harrison, the guy that does the really cool perspective stuff. He had been using Procreate, if you go back and look at his videos, from 8 years ago. 8 years ago would put us at 2012. It's 2020 now, right? But I watched these videos before 2020, so it put you at 2011. That's how long this guy had been using Procreate, or Procreate Pocket, or whatever version existed, right? So people have been using these softwares for a long time. People have been practicing, and it's been building up its strength. The iPad Pros helped it build up its strength. The Apple Pencil helped it kind of push itself to a level of, damn near perfection. It's took itself, and I feel like there's some kind of like partnership going on with Apple and Procreate. I don't know the kind of the deepness of it and the depths of where that goes, but I feel like it's being pushed, right? And it's a very good price. It's a software that is thousands of times cheaper than Photoshop, thousands of times cheaper than software that you have to pay monthly for. It's this incredibly cheap, incredibly well put together, incredibly intuitive software, right? So what about the tools within the software, the brushes and stuff, the engine? And this is where I make my argument. It gave us an option recently. Procreate 5 was released. It gave us an option to bring in our Photoshop brushes, and most of us did. I did. A lot of other people did. They don't work the same way they work in Photoshop, because it has a different engine. The engine isn't the same, so the interaction with the brushes isn't the same. Some of the brushes don't scale the right way, or the way they paint is changed. The way you would utilize them is become something different. Some of them are pretty good, because some of them are pretty simple, right? I've got a brush similar to this one that I'm using right now, that I use in Procreate, and it's pretty similar. The only difference is, and I use a Wacom Intuos 3 when I paint on Photoshop. I used to use the first generation Cintiq 12-inch, but it was too small, and you know, I just got to a point where I wanted to kind of paint off a Cintiq. I still will be at some point this year, or not even at some point this year, probably very soon. I'll be upgrading to one of those Huion. I don't know the number, but the Huion Cintiq, the big Huion. I'll be upgrading to one of those because I want to get back into the Cintiq game. But this video is about is Procreate a professional tool, and what is a professional tool? It's not even just about Procreate. Let's talk about it. So the thing is, professional tools in art, right? It's just a tool that you can use to make work, you know. And there are people have been using softwares that people don't even know about, like Open Canvas and stuff, for years. So there's many professional tools. It's not just the ones you know about, you know. But in comparison to each other, what stacks up? So for me, the reason I decided to make this video and I wanted to show me painting in Photoshop, because I wanted to showcase why Photoshop is so loved by everybody. And I apologize, this painting was already started when I booted up my computer, because it's a recovery file. My computer turned off for some strange reason, so this is the file that was kind of just there. So I thought I'll just go with it and just do some painting. Now what I'm doing here is something that I don't really do in Coral Painter, and I also use Coral Painter. But I have to be honest with you guys. For the longest time in my life, I was using Photoshop primarily and exclusively because Coral Painter wouldn't work on my MacBook Pro. So there was about a 3-year period where I didn't use Painter. Because the MacBook I had Painter installed on broke. You know, it got old. It was like an old white MacBook. It wasn't even a MacBook Air. It was the old white MacBook that existed before the MacBook Air was a thing. And I remember it died. The battery died, and I didn't have the energy to go get a replacement battery. And you know, and I might do that now. I might see if I can source that now, because I remember my ex-girlfriend had a similar machine, and her battery was hers was even older than mine. And the guy she bought it off ended up getting her a battery, you know, just so she would purchase it off him. He said, all right, I'll purchase you a new battery. Because she complained when she first got it that it wasn't working well. But my point is, I use Photoshop primarily a lot more than I use Painter, because I wanted to learn all these techniques. I remember being a young kid and looking at people's Photoshop paintings and thinking, damn, you know, they're so painterly, you know, how are they doing that? The truth of it is, a lot of the stuff that we see digital or traditional in art is a product of a human. It's a product of hard work. It's not always a product of the software. It's not always about what software you use. Now, this is something I had to learn. There are specific things that are 1,000 times easier to do in Painter than Photoshop. You know, things like blending colors. Things like having, you know, brushes that are realistic, or having brushes that have a certain feel to them, bristles and all that kind of stuff. But for most everything else, Photoshop beats Painter out. Now, to talk about Procreate, and when I say Painter, I haven't mentioned it in this video, I mean Coral Painter, which was a very strong software back in the early 2000s or the early 2010s, before it kind of got beat out by like Clip Studio Paint. And now no one really talks about Coral Painter, but it's pretty much just a gold standard for digital painting. If you kind of, there's a few concept artists here and there that use it, people like Michael Kush, and I can't remember the guy's name, he's very famous. Is it Scott Williams? I'm not sure. But I remember watching some Noman DVDs, and I remember a few concept artists were using it. I think Feng Zhu used to use it too. It was a good tool, but it just got beat out, right? And Photoshop has the same community as Procreate. So with Procreate, what you've seen is there are people coming out of the woodwork with brush packs, new ways to do things, videos, and everything is captured via process. You can see everyone's process. Evan Mel Amundsen has one of the most interesting kind of painting kind of processes, but everyone has access to his process because he posts them. And then he has a few streams on YouTube. You can see how he does these crazy paintings. And for the most part, he uses his brain power. He uses layering to kind of get a cool feel through layers, and he blends stuff together, which is incredible. Which makes you feel like those incredible paintings Evan Mel Amundsen does, they come from drawing. They come from how he draws, right? Which is interesting on its own. But what makes these tools more professional or stronger than each other? Now, Photoshop is digitally for painting and drawing is the strongest because it has the best user base, right? The user base of Photoshop is the vastest. It's everyone. It's the world, you know. And people can keep saying, "Oh, we're using, Affinity Designer and and these new things, these new kids on the block." That is fine. Use them, but the big dog is always going to be Photoshop because of the user base. They're always going to push it beyond where it was naturally supposed to be. That's the only reason people paint in Photoshop anyway, because it's been pushed. It wasn't meant to be a painting app. You know, these little brush alphas weren't meant to be for painting pictures. They weren't meant to be a genre called digital painting. You know, there wasn't meant to be a whole creed of people that paint on their computers with brushes like this. That's not what there was supposed to be. You know, it was meant to be for image editing. And we took it as an art community and made it into a painting platform. And now it's the biggest, most used digital paint app in the history of human beings for now. That could very much change to Procreate in the next 10 years or something else if something else comes along, because it's becoming more accessible. It's becoming more a part of regular society to digitally paint now. So what makes Photoshop the strongest? Photoshop is strong because of its incredible ability, not just to paint, but to do what I mentioned before, to edit images. It has this incredible affinity to manipulate the image, control color. It has color profiles. It does all of these things. It has filters. It has all of these adjustments and effects that go beyond just this stuff. This is literally just the brush tool. This whole painting is just the brush tool. That's what this is, right? This is the brush tool. This guy is only the brush tool. There is so many other tools within Photoshop that push Photoshop to a place that the brush tool, isn't just, isn't the only thing. And that is something that we have to really respect, right? There are other software, as I've said before, Painter, Clip Studio. There used to be a software called Open Canvas. I don't know if it still exists. People still use Paint Tool. Sai, Medibang Paint has showed up, right? But these software only serve one purpose: is to do art, is to paint. These are art software that have sprouted up, right? Photoshop's your multi software. Photoshop has, it has the ability to, if you need a character and then you need that character to have symbols on him, you can quickly make symbols because it's really good for graphic design. If you need to take the character and edit them, but it's all on one layer, it has really good image editing abilities that will allow you to do that beyond what a lot of the other software will allow you to do. And that is the power of Photoshop. it's just so open-ended. You know, things like photo bashing, I wouldn't even attempt to do photo bashing in Corel Painter like I would attempt to do it in Photoshop, because Photoshop has all the tools for it. The clone stamp, you know, just the way it works in general. It has all these things that are designed for that to work, you know. I can liquefy things into place. Now, Procreate. The only weakness that I really experience with Procreate, and I love Procreate, but a big weakness that I experience with Procreate is the fact that Procreate is iOS only. Because it's a fantastic software. It works really well. It's so stable. It tells you what level, what limit you need to be going to, or what limit you're at. You know, it tells you, oh, basically you have this many layers if you're going to work at this canvas size. It tells you, right? Fantastic software. Yes, it does crash sometimes, but I've only really experienced crashes in Procreate when I've overloaded it with something. When I've brought in a document with so many layers, with so many different effects, and, you know, there's ways around that. If you're a Photoshop user, you'll instantly know the ways around that. Copy everything to a new document and edit from the last point that you're at. Don't go from where you've been, you know, go from your last spot. Now, the difference between these two software is the iOS limitation of Procreate means that you can't now photo bash like you could in Photoshop. In Photoshop, you can bring in 5 images, bam, 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 all open, different tabs, all different image tabs, and you can manipulate those images all at the same time if you want, and you can flick between them, like what I'm doing now, right? So I could have 4 photos all at the top of the screen, right? In Procreate, you can't do that, which means that if I want to drag in a photo bash element, I'd have to bring it into my document, have it on a layer or something like that. So there's ways around stuff, but they're not convenient and they're not as efficient as they would be in Photoshop or any of these other software that we have like Painter or whatever. Ignore Snapchat. I apologize. So what I'm alluding to here is the iOS platform is the only thing that holds Procreate back. You know, it has many features, many of its features it does need new features. It does need a few things that Photoshop has, and it does need a few better kind of image editing, kind of like tabs and stuff like that. You know, Photoshop has all these cool filters, so you can add all these cool effects. Photoshop has more than one sharpen. For years and years in the concept art industry, we've had people sharpening their artwork to give it a more realistic, sharp look. And it's very, very important to concept art. It always has been. Procreate only has one option to sharpen your image. We don't even know what type of sharpen we're getting. And it's not very strong. And eventually kind of distorts your work a little bit. Photoshop has many different sharpens. You know? On Photoshop, you can sharpen your work more than once. You can control it a lot better than you can in Procreate. There's a lot, you know, little things that are important, that would be important to like a concept artist that aren't in Procreate. People still use it though. I'm not you know, this isn't me ripping the software down. I use it every day. If I can, you know, I use it every day. To be honest with you, me coming and sitting at my computer and painting like this in Photoshop, this is second nature, but I haven't painted in Photoshop for a while. Probably since the last video, because I spend all my time painting in Procreate. And I'm at a point in my life right now with children and stuff that my children are so young that I haven't had that much time to paint, right? But there's still a massive difference in my workflow in Photoshop and my workflow in Procreate because of these limitations. The brushes, you don't have the ability to bring in textures the same way. You don't have the ability to use that many different tools. Photoshop has many tools. you know, that Procreate doesn't have yet. It's got, you know, it's got the tools that you'd need for art, but there's a lot of other tools in Photoshop that people use that it, you know, for example, the clone stamp. And yes, there is a clone option in Procreate, but in Photoshop, you can just press the clone tool and paint in your clones real quick and go back to your painting instantaneously. It's not a separate menu like Liquify, you know. And I'm not trying to nitpick because I love Procreate. It's just the fact that you feel these differences when it's your daily painting tool. You find yourself using more layering methods, and that's what I mean. It's like you have to kind of, with Procreate, you have to go back to the basics. And going back to the basics isn't a bad thing. It's just you have to be prepared for that, for it to work. I've made so many techniques up. I've come up with techniques that I used to use back in the day when I first learned how to use Photoshop whilst using Procreate. And it's been refreshing, but excuse me, I was just taking a drink of my green tea, but it's been refreshing, but it's not what I wanted to do as an artist. It's, you know, it's separate from what my goal was. My goal wasn't to relearn techniques. My goal was to go forward and create professional art, you know, and that for me is the difference. Now, yes, as I said before, you can create professional work. I'd like to put some of my professional kind of my own, in my own opinion, some of my professional looking work on the screen during this segment, and I'll try and do that in the edit. But it's not the same. If you're someone that's done a lot of speed painting, someone that's kind of gone through the process in Photoshop of doing, you know, so many different images, utilizing, you know, quick fire techniques, Procreate's not the software for you, because it's not that quick fire. Procreate's more of the software for someone that kind of just wants to have a good time drawing and painting. I remember the first time I used it, it was in the Apple store. I'm from Nottingham in the UK, and I went to the Apple store and I remember they had it, and I was like, yes. There was displaying the iPad Pro with the Apple Pencil Pro. I remember complaining, saying to the guy, the Apple Pencil doesn't work. I really need to see how this works and buying one of these. I remember he sorted it out. He reset the iPad because the iPad was kind of, I think it was just overused. It hadn't been turned off for a while, so it was just acting up. And I remember the first time I used Procreate, and it absolutely positively felt immaculate. Like, it felt like, wow, this is perfect. But then, you know, it's for what you're trying to do. You know, if you know what you're trying to do, then yeah, it can be perfect. You know? And that's where I'm going to kind of conclude that whole thing. If you have a streamlined process in mind, yeah, Procreate's fine. But if you've got a more loose artistic process in mind, kind of like speed painterly, you've got this idea that you want to kind of create stuff that is, you know, more on the loose side, but at the same time it's oh, press save, sorry guys. Yeah, it's a product of your brushes, it's a product of you know, intuition. Procreate isn't always the best for that. Now, as I've said, there is an option to bring in your Photoshop brushes. They won't come in exactly the same as they are in Photoshop, but they will come in an aspect of those brushes. Some of them come in perfect, and I have to emphasize that I am not trying to dog on Procreate and its ability to bring in Photoshop brushes. But when these brushes come in, I don't need to save yet. When these brushes come in, it is important that you, in your own mind as an artist, say, okay, I'm going to not have too much faith in the brushes, and I'm going to allow myself to have happy accidents. And that is what I've been doing, because they're not the same. And I said this before, but they have the potential to do something different for you. You have the potential to go somewhere further, create something different. For me, it's interesting because thinking about Procreate and the process and all that kind of good stuff and yada yada yada. For me, it's been interesting because I've spent so long in this software. I love the software, but I do recognize that there is something missing in terms of what Photoshop offers in comparison, right? And that is pretty much it. It still is a software, and ignore what I'm doing. I'm showing scale by making another kind of giant machine thing, but closer to the camera. The only issue is I did it on the base layer, so it's giving me stress, right? What I'm going to try and do is change this to a darken, right? So this being a darken now, it kind of blends in. I want to kind of make it darker because it's closer to us. Yeah, and I want to push this one kind of more into the background. The second one, although the original one I painted, whose face you can see, I'm going to push that more into the background. So we're just seeing how big these guys are, right? Now, the only, you could create something like this in Procreate, right? But here's the issue. The issue is this. The brushes don't work the same. So a lot of the little tippy-tappy stuff you do, and that's what I mean, it's the subtle differences artistically between the software, between Photoshop, Procreate, blah, blah, blah. It's the subtle differences. It's the nuances. How do I do this? How do I do that? That is the key. I always play with scale in my paintings. And the reason I started this new painting was just to show why people love Photoshop. It's for this exact reason. It's this software that allows for incredible speed and efficiency, And I used to really think that Photoshop was inferior to Painter, and I did, because I remember first time I used Painter, or first few times, it has just blended well and stuff, and the truth is they're both incredible pieces of software, and I've had to accept that as life's gone on. I've had to accept that Photoshop is better because it's had a better impact. For me, things are always measured and they always measure, and there's always a scale, and that's just how I live my life. Everything is measured and everything has a scale. How handsome are you? I give you a number if you ask me. How strong are you? We can measure that. We can go to the gym and we can measure your strength on different machines. How good is your art? It can be measured in comparison to other artists, or it can be measured on your impact. The best artist in the world isn't the best artist in the world. The best artist in the world is the person whose impact is felt the most. One of the best artists in the world, crazy enough, and this person might not be the most skilled artist, is Louis van Barley, or Loish, because her impact has been felt all over the world, because she's had so many replicators that have inspired so many other people that she is damn near, the world's most influential digital artist. And then behind her there's people that like the speed painting kind of like generation, and these people, right? I'm trying to decide if these are mountains or if these are clouds. I think I'll go for mountains, right? But yeah, if you don't know who Louise Van Barley is, if you look at her art for 5 minutes, you'll probably realize why all these Instagram people draw very similar stuff. And not all of them, but a lot of these kind of like semi-famous Instagram artists, their work looks like hers. She could very well be said to be the best artist in the world because she inspired damn near a whole group of people to create this art style that is very, very, very similar to her work. But technically, she's not the best artist in the world. Even subject matter, what she draws and paints isn't that diverse. It's very similar what she draws and paints, you know, from time to time. Now, let me switch to subjects again. So what I'm getting from this image right now, we're getting this strange vibe, right? The vibe I'm getting is that this robot is fighting against this robot, right? And I'm like, is that what I was trying to do? It isn't. But you have to ride the wave, right? Whatever the wave is. Maybe these robots are going to fight and this guy's a spectator. You know, this guy here. Oh, okay. You know, maybe they're fighting and this guy's the spectator. I'm not sure. But that's what it's looking like right now, right? Now, as I said this again, as a professional tool, there is nothing wrong with Procreate. But this intuition, these things, these techniques, they don't always work out the same way within Procreate. Because of its feel, because it doesn't have the same feel as Photoshop. You can't tap Alt constantly. In Photoshop, I often, as a painter, will paint a stroke, tap Alt, and carry on painting. And that is how we kind of go through the process of painting, blending colors and stuff, right? And that's how you kind of blend in Photoshop. That's kind of how you've kind of painted in it. Or I've painted, or most people have painted in Photoshop for a long time. We've kind of had our hand on Alt and we've tapped it to get a new color in. And that's a fundamental part of the process. A fundamental part of the process. You can't do that in Procreate. And I really wished, and I really wished this, that they would allow the Apple Pencil to have a one-tap color option. And if they do, please let me know, because that'll change my whole life, right? But as far as I know, they don't. Not yet. It has to be a hold the pen or double tap, right? Which isn't fast enough. It's not intuitive enough for you to access what you need to access for it to work the way that you need it to work. It's just not. So what I'm trying to do now is quickly just adjust some of the colors or some of the value, because we don't have any color yet. Some of the value in this robot that's closer to us. And what I'm going to do, and this is what I always do, so every layer but that guy is being merged. I usually merge him, but I'm not sure I'm going to keep him or not. Maybe he gets a sidekick. But yeah, I'm not against Procreate. I'm just, right now, it still has certain things within it that aren't perfect. But there's some people that use it better than I do. And that is true. Nikolai Lopp-Harrison, way better than I do. He uses it to perfection. He uses it for everything that he does. Right? His process is very much a Procreate process. You know? But it does have its advantages. Those perspective grids are phenomenal. They are absolutely phenomenal. The way in which you can use them is amazing. And I have to be honest about that. That is absolute gold, what they did with those grids. There are certain things about Procreate that surpass almost every other software. But the brushes aren't one of those things. The intuitiveness of the color selection and all that isn't one of those things. Photoshop's giving me a hard time today. Every time I go to paint something, I get this little loading, which I don't understand. But maybe it's because I'm running a few software at the same time whilst recording myself, whilst recording audio. So you guys are getting this live. I'm actually painting this live. This isn't me recording this and then kind of voicing it over. I'm painting this now, you know, like right now. So I've been watching a lot of kind of Lucid Pixel recently. That guy has inspired me to do better artistically. He's just inspired me to kind of talk more emotionally about art, you know. I said I'm a very measured person, right? I'm someone who understands levels, and I understand that, in my opinion, things can be measured, right? Even emotions. I think when we feel strongly about something, like I love My Hero Academia, right? But do I love it as much as Dragon Ball Z? No. Do I love it as much as I love DC Comics? No. So it can be measured. There's a level to where my love for My Hero Academia isn't as high as something else, right? But I love My Hero Academia. As far as I'm concerned, it's one of the best things that I've ever seen in terms of an anime, because it's taken a Western idea, which is superheroes and X-Men, right? And it's basically just X-Men as an anime, and it's made it into this incredible anime. It's made this incredible thing out of it, you know, that didn't exist before, and I have to give it up. And that's how I feel about Procreate. It's this incredible thing that's come along and set the world ablaze with how good it is, right? With how you know, intuitive it is. But it's not perfect. It has flaws. There are some people that make it look perfect, but that's not the true representation of what it is. If you were watching the video and you saw my friggin' brush palette come up and disappear, since I upgraded my iMac, I've been getting this weird Photoshop issue. So Photoshop's not perfect either. I want to put that out there. It's more stable than Procreate has been throughout the years. So I don't usually use layers, but I'm at a point where I'm kind of like, why not? It's doing this weird thing now where the brush I was using the whole day has now decided to change into something different, which is strange. Which is cool though. Happy accidents, right? But, you know, end of the day, my conclusion to this whole video is Photoshop is probably going to be king for a while. But Procreate is coming for Photoshop. Procreate is coming for all software. They're going to keep making it better, hopefully. They're going to refine the brush engine and make the blending brushes a little bit better, because I don't think they're very good right now. because it's already a revolution. It's already a software that can't be stopped. People love it. You know, the stuff like Procreate was already tried with stuff like the Cintiq Companion, but didn't stick. So I'm having this strange issue where I was painting with this brush all day, right? And now it's decided to act differently. And I'm like, what? So that's where we are. And don't ask me. There's still things I don't understand. I'm guessing it was a brush preset that kind of like could be altered. And now I've altered it somehow. But I don't know what I pressed, so it's a bit strange for me. And it keeps reverting to this thing. But this isn't it either. This is close to what it was though. Something like this. It was like this kind of smeary brush. Now it's changed, but these things happen. You're in this process with me, guys, so we're here. Oh, I've got the normal one back. Interesting. Now it's loading though. Well, this is my life today. My life today is loading brushes. So I think this is the one that I was kind of looking for when I... Alright, so what I'm going to do is... going to just go here. So I don't have this weird issue again. I'm going to hit... Capture brush size and preset. Cool. So now I just have a normal version of that brush that is not changeable. And I'm hoping it's the same as I had before. But yeah, this is pretty much just the brush anyway. You know, this is the one I tried to use when I built up my giants and all that. So I think it is. So we're good. Fun fact. So back when I started painting, I wouldn't have even looked at a brush like this. I'd be like, what is that? You know? And it's like now, I kind of relish in brushes like this. And I've seen so many artists kind of come and go in different ways. Like one of my favorite artists a few years ago was a guy called Alexander Zedig Debwan. And he's still around. But the style of art that made me fall in love with the guy's work, he doesn't even practice anymore. And it's very simple to say what style of art that was. He used to paint. He used to be a digital painter. He used to create these really cool paintings. And he probably could make them in Procreate too. He used to spend a lot of time kind of laboring over these pieces. And they were relatively simple characters, but he used to spend a lot of time kind of making them work. Right? All in Photoshop, and they'd look beautiful. Beautiful kind of like blended looking characters, right? And I watched I think an hour and a half long podcast with him, and he was saying, nah, I don't think I could do that anymore. I don't think I could paint like that. He said you have to be in it, right? And I don't really agree with that, because I haven't painted in Photoshop for a while, and I still feel like I can do everything I did before. But I have been painting in Procreate, so maybe it's just the fact that he hasn't been painting, right? But there is a flow state you get into, and I can't find myself getting into the same flow state in Procreate when it comes down to things that aren't just a specific character. I can't find myself getting into any kind of environmental stuff in Procreate unless it's perspective driven, because I feel like the restrictions are too heavy. And for me, that's a big issue. And I'm only talking about personal opinions. I'm not saying that's absolute, because there are people that create environments in Procreate. There are people that do studies of the world in Procreate. There are people that do a lot of this stuff. And it works for them. But for me, it doesn't work. I've tried everything, and and I'm going to keep trying, and I hope in a few weeks I can make a new video just recording from Procreate, talking about how my process has changed. But I've used it for over a year now, and it's been very similar the whole time. I get how it works. It has this as I said, it's best to, within Procreate, it's best to understand what it is that you're trying to create before you go ahead and create it. It's best to figure that out first, and then when you figure that out, you can flourish. So once you've got your process down, that's when you're okay. But if you don't have it down, if you just want to go in and try and do a speed paint, it's not always the best software for that. But I'm going to leave that video here. I don't know how long I've kind of like complained about Procreate in this video. And I'm not trying to be kind of like the naggy art guy about Procreate on YouTube, because I do love the software and I will be making some Procreate vids. But for me, there's just a few issues that I can't really live through these issues as a guy who came from Photoshop, and that's pretty much it, really, because I did come through Photoshop, and that was, Photoshop is my software, or was for the longest time, and it's just hard to kind of switch, because some people have completely switched over, and I've a kind of associate, friend, someone I talked to online, someone who showed me a lot of respect and love, Mike Henry. He's got a really good channel. He creates these really beautiful character driven pieces in Procreate, and if you want to do that, that is absolutely positively doable. That is probably the most doable thing in Procreate. Character driven pieces, kind of like one or two characters, maybe a scene, but it's character driven, right? That is probably the best thing to create in Procreate that works the way that it should. But most other things are, in terms of like environments and stuff, not impossible, but just more difficult to create. And that's all I really wanted to express. I didn't want to express anything but that. It's just not the same process as Photoshop. Especially because environments rely on so much value, kind of like value change, and Photoshop allows you to just press real quick and change those values on the fly whilst painting. This is interesting because this piece, right, and this is a separate, I like to kind of change subjects a lot when I speak. This piece looks like an old piece I created called Duel of the Giant Bots. It doesn't look like it, but it looks like it should be called Duel of the Giant Bots, because it's two giant, seemingly robots kind of going at it. I'm hoping for my next video the load screens won't be so harsh, because I'm getting a lot of loading when I'm in Photoshop today, and I don't know why that is. I'm going to have to clean my hard drive or something, I can imagine, but I hope the next video isn't like this. Oh, I'm going to leave that like that. We're going to leave that ambiguous, you know. And then one more thing, something I love to do in a lot of my paintings, just throw some birds in, because birds don't care about you guys' beef. Birds are just going to be birds. Lots of birds. And there it is. That's the semi-final speed painting. Duel of the Giant Botudos. So, you know, in closing, guys, paint with Procreate. I recommend what I've recently switched to doing now. I use a square brush or I use a round brush, which is mad because, you know, I don't really use the round brush in Photoshop anymore, you know, unless I get inspired by a robot pencil or something and I decide to use the round brush. But for the most part, you know, I don't really use the round brush in Procreate. Now, funnily enough, while I've got this image on the screen, I'm currently going through my iPad. I've just whipped it out, just because I've mentioned Procreate. I've just whipped it out, and I have to admit, I've gone into my speed paints folder, and some of them are cool, but they just lack that little extra that you would have got in Photoshop. But some of them are admittedly very cool, and I might post them at the end of this video. Because there are some cool ideas here, and the perspective tool is better than any other perspective tool out there, period. But that's where I'm going to end this video, guys. Thank you for watching me rant about Procreate and me kind of like not exaggerate, not put Photoshop on a pedestal, more me kind of praise Photoshop, right? Thank you for watching that. It's always a pleasure when people watch my videos, when people can get through them. And I'll see you guys in the next one. I think the next video is probably going to be about Painter in Photoshop. I've already made one. I'm not sure if that'll come out before this one or not, but I think the next video will be directly about Painter versus Photoshop, or Painter and the differences between the two. Not really a versus, you know, I'm not so much again on the versus thing. Just use whatever software you want. Use them all if you have to, you know, why not? You know, but I think the next video will be about the differences between Painter and Photoshop. So thanks for watching, guys. I'll see you guys in the next one. Peace.